Moving on. Last bit on bottom of page 4. Here's an example of an unethical use of non-therapeutic experimentation. Direct quote, quote, "The aim of a non-therapeutic trial is to obtain knowledge which may contribute toward the future development of new forms of treatment or procedures." Now, here's the caveat: where the patient is intentionally misinformed, as in the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. Right? The patient is intentionally misinformed of the risks and have not consented to participate, or their participation was based on misinformation, and or the physician incorporates methods into the research design that intentionally destroy, hamper, or suppress the patient's health. Right? The idea is the medical practitioner, so in this the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, what ends up happening is people are willfully infected with a horribly painful, horribly destructive virus, right? And instead of allowing the participants to get better, right? They are allowed to just, and we'll talk about this in the next section, in the moral ethic of this, right? They're allowed to just, get sick and suffer, right? In terms of assessing sort of the destructive bits of, and I'm not really in the medical community. I want to say it's, oh my goodness, I used to know this. I want to say it's epidemiology, right? It's sort of like the destructive bits of the assessment of pathological blah, 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 blah. I used to be fascinated by this stuff when I was younger. It's been a freaking decade since I've read any of this literature or anything, so I'm not in any sense a medical expert. I do know medical ethics rather well, but there's a branch of medicine that looks at sort of pathology. You can imagine that branch, I forget the name of the branch, and I know it's not a pathologist, I want to say it's epidemiologist, but I don't know. This branch of the medical community looks at how disease is spread and what it does to tissue damage in brains and neurons and blah, 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 blah. Can you imagine how unethical it is to recruit someone into an experimentation where it's not going to benefit them, so it's obviously non-therapeutic, and then I willfully contaminate the person's blood with bacteria, virus, what have you, only to watch how the body and make assessments of how the disease eventually kills and ravages the systems of the human. I mean, that's of the human subject. That's not cool, right? That's not ethical. And it's so obvious, right? So I don't have to belabor the point because it's so obviously wrong. But the idea is, it is non-therapeutic because it doesn't benefit. It's different from non-therapeutic that also don't benefit but aren't designed to harm. This latter example is an example where it's not going to benefit the patient. It's definitely non-therapeutic, but it's designed, and the intent of the research itself is designed to do damage to the patient. Completely immoral, illegal, and you should be serving some hard time if you do that type of stuff. Alright, so immoral experimentation, just flat out immoral, or what I would say Maleficent, M-A-L-E-F, well, actually I probably can spell it. Alright, so that's that. Let's look at number 3. Oh, this is not number 3, this is C. We're still in beneficence, right? If we're talking about the various forms, right, an immoral, just so we cover all our base, experimentation. If we're talking about immoral experimentation, we want to cover the gradient. Obviously, this would be antithetical to beneficence, right? And it's maleficence. I think I spelled it right. M-A-L-E-F-I-C-E-N-C-E. To do harm, right? This is completely antithetical to the idea of beneficence, right? You can have a ton of problems here. Here we clearly are benefiting the patient. Here we're neither benefiting nor harming the patient. Here we are harming the patient, right? And the idea is you can't do that. You just can't design willfully a research experiment to strategically harm your patient. That's not the role of the medical community. So, human subject experimentation specifically designed to harm the patient's health or well-being, even if the justification is for sort of this utilitarian greater good. Isn't it justifiable to run a horrible an experiment in a thought experiment? This is all easy, right? And this is why I don't really dabble in this stuff so much. But you design this ethics-based thought experiment where, okay, we're going to really torture one person to save the lives of many. Is it justified to torture the one person in order to save the lives of many? And you think sort of randomly, you take any sort of intro to utilitarianism or general ethics class, and instructors present this sort of cliched thought experiment all the time. I heard it all the time as an undergrad, not so much as a graduate student, but as an undergrad I heard the example a billion times. And me personally, I think the presentation of the example is itself unethical. Because what if it was you? Unfortunately, however, there's historical facts. We know what the Nazi doctors did. There's a whole book written on what the Nazi doctors did. But recently, I didn't know this until actually this year, maybe a few months ago. A friend on YouTube directed me, independent to this lecture series, to the Japanese experiment in Unit 731, and I have a hyperlink there. And I had known about the experimentation that took place in the Japanese Unit 731. So I watched some videos, I read some literature, and it was freaking bad. It was horrendous. I mean, to say that it is immoral it doesn't carry enough weight. It was the most depraved, base, horrific, sadistic misuse of medical power. It was bar none. People were sawed in half alive, set on fire. The most macabre, infected with the most ravenous diseases, all in the name of science. Now, I'm not knocking science, right? This is not the point. The point is, it's a medical ethics lecture. We have to make sure that when we talk about medicine, when we talk about science, that science and medicine also has a framework with which its practitioners can be held accountable for violations in the experiments that they have with human subjects, right? They can be held accountable in a court of law, but I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not doing this legally, but they can be held accountable socially, right? That a stigma can be attached to practices like this, because these stigmas do, in fact, govern the way in which people behave in the world, right? So that we as a society have an obligation, we as society, not as medical practitioners, have an obligation to blow the whistle and say, listen, that practice is immoral. That practice is used to dehumanize other people, and you should be held accountable. Then we put pressures on the courts and blah, 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 blah. You guys get the idea. So immoral experimentation is exactly what I said it was, right? And the example, read the examples. I don't know if I linked you to the video. If I linked you to the video, I'm just letting you know right now, the video is pretty graphic. It's extremely graphic. I don't remember if I linked to the video. I probably linked to a PDF. But if one of those links, example 1 or 2, takes you to the video, I'm letting you know right now, the video is super graphic. So, if you're not into that, don't watch it. So you got the heads up. Okay, so we talked about the first half, right? The first 2 of the 4 principles of medical ethics. Now we have the remaining 2. Okay. The first of the remaining 2, which is number 3, is non-maleficence. Remember what I said? Oh, and I could have checked the spelling of maleficence right here. I think I spelled it right. If maleficence is intentionally doing harm, then obviously non-maleficence is just the opposite, right? It sounds the same to be beneficence, but there's a minor distinction. So non-maleficence, N-O-N-M-A-L-E-F-I-C-E-N-C-E. Okay, this also is patient-centered. And it's the idea of not harming others. Here's the direct quote. Above all, this maxim implies that if the physician is not technically competent, If the physician, and I have a great example for this, if the